Hi everyone, welcome into the Millstone Makers podcast, where we take a closer look at food process, supply chain, and financing. In each episode, we analyze ways companies are making food happen across the company and across the world. Hey you! Welcome back to our podcast, Millstone Makers. My name is Thomas Smith, and before today's episode, or we begin discussing any sort of food manufacturing, I wanted to take a moment to look back and give you some background about how this idea came about, what it represents, and how you can benefit from it as somebody who eats food, enjoys food, studies food, maybe works for a food company, or you want to work for a food company, and you have no background in the business of food. That is why this podcast is here. So, as I mentioned, my name is Thomas Smith. I'm a young professional working at Tyson Foods, and the concept for the Millstone Makers came about while I was working at a food co-packer. I was going to school, and a buddy of mine actually invited me to come swing by the co-packer on campus. And a co-packer is basically it's a team that basically sets up contracts with food companies. And the food companies come to this co-packer and they basically say, hey, look, we've got these products and we want to sell them to our neighbors, or we want to sell them at the farmer's market, or we want to sell them in 10 grocery stores locally, or we want to blow this thing up and we want to sell our chocolate chip cookies or our bottled water. Got to be sparkling, right? Their water in stores or to restaurants. It doesn't matter if it's a fresh juice, if it's a salsa, if it's a seasoning, or a frozen food. It can be really anything. And so my friend, he invited me one day to check it out, and I sat down and I met some people while they were having lunch, and that was a cool experience because you got to really see a lot of different people. You had people from cooking backgrounds, you had food scientists that were at the facility, you had people who were working on marketing plans, people who were working on their business plans, and then you had people who worked for distribution companies. So they worked for a local retailer that was in the area. But at the end of the day, I said, wow, food is a business. And not only is it just a business, but it's incredibly interesting, and it's something that I could see myself getting into. And so there's been a lot of innovation and process and science and creativity that's involved with setting up a co-packer facility and maintaining it. But it's something that personally, for me, I've enjoyed doing projects there, working there, and getting to know people. And so what I want to do through this podcast is document and share some past awesome experiences of working with food manufacturing teams, and then also to open up the discussion to other people who are interested in learning more about this, or they work in this particular industry and want to see how other companies are doing it. This is an opportunity just for other people to chime in, share about their experiences, and ultimately, as a group of people, have some really cool conversations. And so I hope to be able to open that door, and alongside sharing a little bit about myself and how this podcast came to be, I also want to share a little bit about the areas that we focus on. So the Millstone Makers podcast focuses primarily on 3 areas. The first area is food process itself. So what does it take for a company to make a Danimals yogurt? What does it take for them to create Hidden Valley Ranch? What does it mean when somebody says cold press juice? What does that actually mean and entail from a manufacturing standpoint? And then also, 2, what are the costs associated in the supply chain? So once we have created and written down the process and we're able to be consistent with making the product on a small scale, how do we grow that and distribute that out so that we have the opportunity to share our food product with other people who are in the area, whether that's down the street or across the country. And so we'll take a deeper look at supply chain. The final and third area that we're going to study more about is financing. So, of course, it would be nice to just have money floating around, but of course, that's not the case. So, the Millstone Makers podcast will help to provide and share a little bit about how companies are funding these capital expenditures, how they're paying for equipment, and what that type of equipment costs. Those are all areas that are involved in manufacturing food, and I'm excited because this is really not about just one person talking about food manufacturing. Again, my hope is that it opens up a conversation and enables other people to share more about their own workplace, more about some of the strategies that they formulate to help operate and optimize their food operations. If you really enjoyed this episode, I'm really pumped that you tuned in. But we're going to have more episodes in the future. So what you can do is you can go ahead, hit the subscribe button now, or you can tune in to our podcasts on any of the following channels. Right now we're publishing to SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. You can watch the full-length podcast there. And then also, too, we'll have some highlights here and there available through IGTV, some of our posts, our stories, and Snapchat. Again, I'm super pumped and excited to have you on with me on this podcast. And the hope is that we'll be able to cover our first process, high pressure processing, in the next episode. Stay tuned.